I love everything about the Four Temperaments. I first learned about them and took a personality test back in the 60s in my all-girls Catholic high school humanities class. And we learned that Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, had really coined these four true and unchanging parts of the human person and human temperament. I was fascinated. I've always been fascinated about what makes me tick and what makes other people tick. So I was so excited to learn the Four Temperaments and take the test until I got the results. I was filled with shame and embarrassment because part of my temperament is sanguine. And I didn't see the positives, I saw the negatives. Shallow, flighty, fickle, doesn't stick to things, doesn't go deep. And I'm like, oh. And in reality, what was happening with me, I was everything the opposite of my mother, who was a melancholy, who I wanted to be like, who I admired and was trying so hard to model. And I always knew there was something off with me, something different about me compared to my mom. And it was a source of, I was triggered. It was a source of shame. And I, didn't like that test anymore. But I remembered it. I was still interested until years later when I was in a jazzercise class, I think in the 80s. And these old cassette tapes were going around by this Christian speaker, Florence Littauer, who was known in the Amway circles as teacher of the temperaments. I remember learning that in high school, and I was fascinated again. And this time I'd learned to really know myself a little better and love myself, and I wasn't afraid to take the test. And I found out I am a natural, take charge, leader, choleric, and a fun, sparkly, sweet, delightful sanguine. And this time I saw the weaknesses, but I also saw the beauty and the giftedness of the strength. And I was so excited, and I did more of a deep dive into it. I still had questions. One of the things that I liked back in the 80s when I was learning this was that Florence Littauer came up with something that nobody else had really addressed. I got all the other personality books that were written, some by Catholic priests, back in the 30s and 40s, and I started doing a deep dive. Florence realized that some people develop masks. They take on a different temperament or a different response or a different personality to avoid rejection, to measure up, to succeed. And sometimes they get so confused with that, they don't know who they really are. And that hit me. I knew that was true. And so I love this. I write about it. I speak about it. I've incorporated it in my own life for years, and it's improved all my relationships, my marriages, my children, my parent-child relationships, everything. So I want to share with you some of the things we can't do a lot in 10 minutes here. But I want to cover some things that maybe nobody else has. First, let's go over what I know you probably know being on CatholicMatch. You know that temperaments are part of God's design for the human person, and that we're born with them, and that they don't change, that the influences, things can shape them and mold them, but it's God's gift to you. And He's a master designer, and the four temperaments are like the four seasons. They're all together, but they're complementary, and they each have their strengths and weaknesses. You might also remember and have learned that everybody has two of the four temperaments. I like to think of it this way. The human heart, which is where all of our who we are flows from, the human heart has four chambers. Two chambers, their little job is to take blood in. And the other two chambers are to send that blood out. So that's like two introverts and two extroverts. The four temperaments is the same. There are two natural extroverts and two natural introverts, and everybody is a combination of two, the other two being your complementary opposites. Nobody can be more than two, and nobody's just one, and nobody's any other number. Anyway, let's keep going with this. There are some problems with the study of the temperaments, and you've probably heard it, and maybe you feel this, that it's just putting people in a box. It's just slapping a label on people. It doesn't account for their unique unrepeatability. And that's true. Some people can use it as a label and stop right there. Some people do, treat it, bad and just dismiss who you really are and all your complexity. But that's not the truth of the temperaments. That's just the beginning. Let's talk about a couple nuances in this particular video. I want to talk about, I think, the most commonly misunderstood part of temperaments is introvert and extrovert. I want you to remember that introverts are extroverts. Hold that thought. Introverts are extroverts. And the reason I'm saying is this because every introvert can be an extrovert. They can function as an extrovert. They can be outspoken. They can move quickly. They can take charge. They can be bossy and pushy. But here's the difference. The introvert doesn't rush into those things. The introvert, by his or her nature, is more cautious and slow and careful to move. And usually that's a good thing. So introverts can look like extroverts, especially at work. I know a lot of men who are natural introverts, and that is part of their giftedness and their beauty as God made them. And they are manly and they are strong, but they are introverted and they are kind and gentle, and maybe they move more slowly or cautiously. And the world and the culture has identified that as being more feminine or weak or slow or not, macho. And so they're afraid to own their own introverted temperament, especially when they're at work and they are put in a position of being the boss or being in charge or moving people along. And they can do very well at it. But again, it doesn't come as naturally and they don't move into it as quickly unless they're really comfortable and at peace about it. So that's just food for thought. I know I have a lot of men who come to me, and I'm not trying to lump everybody in this, but I have a lot of men who say, I'm choleric, and I hear it in their voice, I see it in their body language, and I know them, they're not choleric, but they can function as a choleric, and part of them really wants to be choleric because they don't want to be a weak and pathetic and introverted and shy and maybe thumb-sucking introvert. So we get afraid of these terms and we get triggered, and then we run over and, well, I'm this or he's this. This is a study that is so beautiful and so true and so freeing. If you will slow down and go into it without fear, it can be really life-changing. And so it would follow that the majority of people are not extroverts. Really, in the 30-some years that I've been living this and teaching it and continuing to study, most people are natural introverts. That doesn't mean they're shy. It doesn't mean they're incapable. It means they move carefully and slowly and methodically and thoughtfully through life. And that's a good thing. And I'm a double extrovert by nature. It's like I have adrenaline running through my veins. I can't slow down. I have a real hard time stopping to think about things carefully first. And I tend to rush in and trip over my feet. But with time and maturity and grace and education and understanding, I've been able to bring out the parts of me that can be slow and careful and cautious and tender and quiet, like the things that come naturally to the introverted temperaments. So the third little nuance I want to throw at you first is introverts and extroverts pretty much are the same in a lot of ways, and that the majority of people are a combination of introverts. And the third thing is you have no weaknesses. I love this part. If you take a temperament test or read any book on temperaments and go through the list of all the strengths, your weaknesses are only those strengths carried to extreme. Let me give you an example. If I, as a sparkly sanguine, love to tell stories at the cocktail party and everybody's listening to me and laughing and I go, oh, this is great. And I keep talking and talking and talking. Now my strength becomes a weakness because I'm no longer tuned into others. I've moved into myself and my own ego. So what is a strength becomes a weakness. What really moves our strengths into the weak category is some kind of fear. Some kind of fear. People won't like me. People won't love me. I'll be exposed. All the natural fears that we have as human persons. So those are just a few little things for you to think about. If you feel like you want to do more of a deep dive, I have some books on this. I love to help my coaching clients go deeper into the temperaments, but I'm not really here to sell it. I'm just here to intrigue you a little bit more. So 4 things maybe as a takeaway for this video. Number 1, if you're really interested in this and want to know more, take your time. Don't rush through it and say, I'm this or he's that or she's that. Do a little deep dive, do a little digging, slow down and give yourself time to learn more about it. Number 2, get some outside input. If you're not sure that you really have identified yourself correctly or somebody else, ask your close friends, your spouse, if you're single, you don't have a spouse, but anybody who's close to you, and get their input. Sometimes outside input doesn't have the blocks that we might have when we're looking at this. Number 3, look for the shame. When all of us are afraid of being that temperament or that label, or we don't want Rose Sweet to say, you're not choleric. There's some shame there. We're afraid to move out of where we put ourselves to this other place. There's fear and anxiety because what if this, and then may we be rejected, and then this, and blah, blah, blah. All this, we carry so much unhealed trauma, all of us. And part of this, discovering more of who you are and who the other person is to have a safe place to bring that shame out. And number 4, ask God for courage. Say, Lord, I think maybe this is something you want me to know more about, or maybe you don't. But if you do, say, I want the courage to see it clearly and to take the time to go through it right and to be open and receptive to the surprises that you might have for me in this. So please go to my website if you want to know a little bit more about this, rosesweet.com. But CatholicMatch also has tons of beautiful materials and articles on the 4 temperaments that if you haven't taken advantage of those, please do that. This is a beautiful, beautiful thing that has been a blessing to me and a blessing to so many people in my life. And kids love to learn their temperament. And most kids are really sharp and really good at understanding them. So don't be afraid. Do this. See and know how to love yourself better and to understand the giftedness that God has given you to bring to the world so that you can also see and know and love other people in your relationships, all your relationships, appropriately. Thank you, and we will see you next time.